Hi there. Thanks to everyone who's taken part in the Intro to Philosophy MOOC so far. I just wanted to take the opportunity at the end of the first week, or coming up to the end of the first week, to record a quick video response to some of the amazing stuff that's been happening on the discussion forums. I've been really impressed by both the amount of stuff that we've seen on there and also the quality of the discussion. So if you haven't been on the forums yet, then I really encourage you to get on there and join in the discussion. There's been some really sort of insightful, thoughtful, critical engagement with the topics that we were talking about in the first week. So lots of great stuff there to help you get the most out of the course. There's been so much great stuff that there's unfortunately absolutely no way that the staff on the course here at Edinburgh can respond to everything. So at the moment there's over 2,000 threads. There's almost 10,000 total posts in the forums, so there's no way we can look at it all, but we don't really feel too bad about that, because just like looking at the quality of discussion that's on there already, everybody on the course who's contributing to the forum discussion is doing a really great job of giving really insightful, constructive and helpful comments about everybody else's questions. But I did want to just try and say a little bit more, or pick up on a few things that I thought were some of the more recurrent points that were getting raised on the forums. So the topic for this week was trying to get a general overview or idea of what philosophy as a distinctive subject actually is. My suggestion was that we can think of it as the activity of working out the right way of thinking about things. Now, I was really happy to see that a lot of the activity on the forums is critically engaging with that definition. So a lot of people are sort of questioning ways in which they don't think that it's quite right. It might need tweaking, or it might need throwing out altogether. And that's one of the things I was saying in the video. That's exactly what philosophy is all about, right? Trying to articulate your disagreements, trying to give reasons for the views that you hold and why you don't think that the views of your opponents are quite right. So it's really good to see that sort of activity there. But I wanted to say a little bit more about a couple of specific things that people said about the definition. So the first point that seemed to come up in a few different places and that I thought was really interesting was the question of whether or not the activity of actually thinking about things counts as philosophy itself. So the thought there, to back up a little bit, is if philosophy is just working out how to think about things, then where does that leave the actual thinking about things that we do after we done the working out, right? So isn't some of that thinking about things philosophy as well? And I think that's right, and I think sometimes the thinking about things itself is philosophy. But what I was trying to drive at by defining philosophy in that way was that the thinking that you're doing when you're doing philosophy is of a specific kind. So specifically, I think you're always thinking about the presuppositions or hidden assumptions of some particular topic or domain of inquiry. So to quickly pick up on another sort of big theme from the threads in the discussion forums, think about the distinction between philosophy of science and actually doing science itself. So when we're doing philosophy of science, we're interested in asking questions about the right way of thinking about scientific inquiry. Okay, so we ask questions like, what makes a theory a scientific theory rather than some other kind of theory? We ask questions like, what is the way in which evidence can confirm or refute a scientific theory? And we ask questions of the kind that we'll be thinking about in week 6 of the course, I think. What is the nature of the knowledge that scientific theories give us, right? Are they giving us a true description of reality as it exists independently of us? Or are they just giving us useful predictive and explanatory tools that are good for helping us tell nice, intelligible stories about the way things are? So there's going to be lots more about thinking through those specific kinds of questions in week 6. But for now, just think about the activity of doing philosophy of science, asking those kinds of questions about the presuppositions of scientific inquiry, and doing science itself, right? So the thought behind defining philosophy as working out the right way of thinking about things is that when we're doing philosophy, we're asking questions about those kinds of presuppositions, right? Asking questions about the right way of thinking about a particular domain of inquiry. And then once we've done that, or maybe we don't want to bother doing that at all in the first place, we can just get on with asking questions within that framework, right? Without worrying about the status of those presuppositions, right? So we can just get on with doing science. So just to give like one other quick example, in case it's not clear, like think about the difference between doing philosophy of art and doing art itself, right? So when we do philosophy of art, we ask questions like, what is an artwork? What does it mean for some kind of activity to qualify as artistic activity? When we're doing art itself, we're not interested in those questions. We're just interested in actually doing the artistic activity and producing the artwork. Okay, so obviously doing philosophy is going to involve the activity of thinking things through. But I was trying to capture the thought that it's thinking about a specific sort of domain, right? It's about the domain of presuppositions of some topic or field of inquiry. Another way I tried to capture that was by the talk of stepping back that I often used, right? So stepping back from the activity we're actually engaged in, whether that's science or art or something else, and then working out the right way of thinking about that activity by examining the presuppositions of it. Okay, so the second theme that I thought was really interesting that I wanted to say a little bit about was a lot of people were asking things about this sort of central plank of the definition of philosophy I suggested, of working out the right way of thinking about things. So what is this right way of thinking about things? How should we think of the fact of there being a right way or a wrong way here? So you might think that the right way of thinking about things is just the way that maps onto reality as it actually is, or you might think that perhaps the right way of thinking about things is just going to be the way that's somehow best for us or our lives. Perhaps it does the best job of promoting human flourishing, or perhaps it just makes us happiest. So lots of different ways of trying to cash out this notion of the right way, and I was sort of being deliberately non-committal about which one of those I actually wanted to endorse. Another issue that arises here is whether or not we should even think that the activity of philosophy, the activity of just thinking about things, is going to work as a way of getting towards the right way of thinking about things. So perhaps our minds just aren't up to the job. Perhaps we just never will arrive at the right way of thinking about things. And I was really sort of happy and excited to see people raising these sorts of questions all over the place in the forums, and I think they're exactly the right questions to be raising about this kind of definition of philosophy. So I was happy and excited because I think there's a long philosophical tradition of raising these sorts of questions and trying to answer them or work out how or whether philosophy could even answer them. And so when we're doing this, we're engaging in philosophical reflection about the scope and limits and powers of philosophy. So I mentioned in one of the comments on the forum that these are just the sorts of questions that famous philosopher Immanuel Kant, who certainly everybody agrees is one of the greatest philosophers who's ever lived, and a lot of people think that he's the greatest. Those are the sorts of questions about philosophy and the limits of philosophy that he put on the philosophical agenda. And I think a lot of people would think that it's fair to say that philosophy has been grappling with those questions ever since. Okay, so I don't necessarily think that that's a problem with my particular way of defining philosophy, but I think it's exactly right to note that it raises these puzzling looking issues about the status of philosophy and what sort of knowledge it can actually get us, and why we should think that it's a good way of actually arriving at knowledge. The last thing that I wanted to say a little bit about was a lot of people were talking in various different ways about meaning and issues to do with the meaning of life. So I tried to be very careful in the videos not to promise you a story or a theory about what I thought the meaning of life was. I said that I wasn't sure that that was my job to try and give such a thing. Rather, we were just sort of interested in using the question of the meaning of life as an example of the different sorts of ways that a philosopher might approach or think through a question. So one of the things that arose there was this distinction between designative and expressive theories of meaning, and so a lot of the comments were expressing a bit of puzzlement about that distinction, which is quite a sort of puzzling and difficult one, I think. So people seem to be generally pretty happy with what the designative view of meaning was supposed to be. Right? So a word can mean something by designating it, and that just means that it has its meaning in virtue of what it stands for or picks out in the world. Okay, so what does Dave Ward mean? Well, you can try and give an answer to that question by just gesturing towards me, pointing towards me. By answering the question about the meaning of Dave Ward by referring to the object in the world that it designates. Now, the expressive view of meaning, as a lot of people noted, is kind of harder to state clearly. But I think the best way of doing it, is, like I said in the videos, is still through this trying to think about cases of artworks. So this is basically to just reiterate something that I said in the videos in a bit more depth. But think of a great piece of literature or film. So think of the film Apocalypse Now, perhaps. So suppose that you think that that is a really great film, and it has something sort of profound and important to tell us, perhaps about the nature of war or the nature of humanity or something like that. Now, in the case of really great works of art, what they have to tell us or teach us or say to us isn't really something that you could express just by sort of writing it down in words. If you could, then the film or the work of art would kind of be redundant in a way, right? They wouldn't have needed to make that film to express those truths or those lessons. They could have just written it down and we could have just read them easily. But hopefully it's sort of intuitive to a lot of people that in a lot of cases we do have this sense that some piece of art can seem to be telling us something or teaching us something that does sort of transcend our attempts to express exactly what that is in words, right? And so one way of trying to say what's going on there is that, well, the film has a meaning or a message, but it's sort of conveying that to us by expressing it rather than in this straightforward designative way of just pointing us to various objects or features in the world. Just to tie this back into the sort of overarching theme of this week, which was about the nature and scope of philosophy, interestingly, like a lot of philosophers have kind of come to this conclusion at various stages in their lives. So sometimes you'll find philosophers who start off trying to sort of explain what they think are important or profound truths about humanity or our lives or something like that, just by writing down those truths in a book, just in essays or scholarly works. But then some of them become dissatisfied with that approach and try to sort of convey those truths by writing poetry or music, right? So they think that there are important messages that they have to convey or important things that they grasp about humanity or about our lives, but that they can't get at them just by writing them down, just by sort of designating them and pointing us towards those facts in the world. Rather, they have to use other sort of expressive forms. They have to write a poem or write a piece of music that somehow conveys what they want to say in another way. So again, that's just to talk perhaps a little bit more length about what this expressive conception of meaning is. And I think people are perfectly right to note that it sounds kind of mysterious and unclear. So I mentioned in some of the comments, and I think on the resources page for week 1, that I'm taking this sort of expressive designative contrast from the work of Charles Taylor. So if you want to try and follow that up, then I really recommend looking at some of Charles Taylor's work. I'll try and post some more suggestions for places that you could go for that. Okay, so that's really just to scratch the surface of some of the topics that were raised in the forums. As I say, it's not going to be viable to try and respond to everything, but those are some of the things that I thought were most interesting and that I felt that I had something to say about. So well done to everybody who's posted in the forums so far. Keep up the good work. I think they're going to be a really, really great resource for the course. And I hope you're enjoying it so far and that you're going to come back and chat on the forums next week about skepticism and epistemology, which is what we'll be thinking about then.